Hey everybody, so we're going to start with chapter 3, video-based lecture, the hands-on based lecture. I'm going to try and do this in 2 different videos, just like chapter 2. That'll break it up. So I'm going to cut this off somewhere around 1 hour in time. Really what that's going to allow us to cover, I hope to cover the first couple of objectives, which deals with arrays, starting to put data into what are called arrays, and statements that repeatedly execute code. And so that's going to be about as far as we get today. Probably we'll talk about the continue statement. We'll stop and pick up in the next video with the if statements. In computer science and programming, we're always working with data. Lots of data. I mean, we pull data out of the database. We're working with people's information. That's why these applications exist. They exist to help you interact with the data. In what used to be a paper and filing cabinet world, we now have a database and application world and website world, where everything is stored more efficiently, where it allows us to analyze the data more efficiently. And so there's all sorts of different structures to store data in. One most basic structure is a variable. And last chapter, we learned how to store data in a variable. And a variable is good for storing a single piece of information. But there are many other structures. Matter of fact, there are classes called, there's a class called data structures, right? And if you end up going to a computer science degree at a 4-year university, you're probably going to study a data structures class that talks about all the different ways to put data into something for its most efficient use. And one data structure, without studying an entire class of different data structures, but another, I guess, you could say primitive data structure that's in just about every language is something called an array. And an array, so what an array is a way to store a group of data, several pieces of information, all using one name. If we look at this array in this picture, this news sections, well, that represents our storage unit. You know, it's like one container, and we have a name for it, and its name is news sections, and the data it holds, well, it holds 4 different strings. I know they're strings because they're in quotes. It holds, the first string is world, local, opinion, and sports. And so now we can have one entity that can hold a bunch of information. And so I'll go ahead and just pull up my code editor, and we'll declare an array. Now, here you can see an array looks a lot like a variable, except for our arrays on the right-hand side of the assignment operator looks a little bit different. So let's just put this chunk of code in our program and then start working with it. Okay, so open up brackets here and do a quick temporary file. That's HTML, and right away I'm going to have a script. And so this is declaring an array. And again, an array is a single storage unit that holds multiple pieces of information. In computer science world, it's just one of many what are called data structures. but it's pretty much I call it a primitive data structure because it's in just about any language that you studied. You're going to study the basic array. And I'll just create an array of students equals, and if we look at the syntax on the PowerPoint, you notice we have the brackets. Okay, so on the right hand side of the assignment operator, we've got some brackets, and then each value separated by a comma. So if I'm putting my students in the array, now I have an array that holds 4 of my students' names. Now these are all strings. It doesn't have to be string. Some languages you can only have arrays of one kind of data type, but here I could put an int in here. I could put a number. I could put true. And those would be acceptable, except for in our example, we're just going to keep it simple. We're just going to keep it strings. Now, that's declaring an array. That's also assigning values into the array. Okay, so declaring is on what's considered on the left-hand side. Declaring, that's where you create the space and memory for it. You actually allocate some of your computer's RAM to storing this information. Okay, so when you hear declaring, that's what declaring is. You're actually taking a piece of or some bytes out of RAM, and your application or your website is going to use that. And then assigning, well, this is the assignment operator. So declaring is on the left, assigning is on the right. And assigning is when you actually put data into the array. So that's just some terminology. It went the same way with variables, right? You declared your variables and then you assigned your variables. So it's really something similar there. And then now if I want, so it's kind of like this. You create the storage unit by declaring it. You put data in by assigning, and now we pull data out of the array. That's really the 3 functions that you can do with an array. That's really the 3 things you can do with it. You declare it, you put data in, and then you pull data out. And so to pull data out, I'll just put this as output. You know, you can write this to a text box. You can do an alert box. You could write it to a paragraph. There's all these different ways. The easiest way is with an alert box. And this is different syntax. You do an alert, the name of the array, which is students. And this is going to look a little bit different because here's another set of brackets. And then inside of those brackets, what piece of information do we want to retrieve? Whose name are we interested in? Well, I don't know. Someone tell me who I'm picking on here. Alex. Okay, we're picking Alex. So arrays have positions. I should rephrase that. Arrays have, each one of these names is called an element. It's a piece of data. It's an element in the array. So Alex is the first element. His position, though, and this is confusing the first time you see it, the first position in the array is always position 0. Okay, so you might think, well, Alex is position 1. We should put students, we should put the number 1 in here. Well, no, Alex, he is the first position, he's the first element, but his position in the array is position 0. Another way of saying that, the index Alex is stored in position 0. You would also say or aka index 0. Position 0, index 0, that's just the terminology how we say it. I would say I would actually read that as, you could say index 0. A lot of times you just call it its sub. So I know it's confusing because I just called it three different things. I called it its position, I call it its index, and you also refer to it as its subscript or subscript. It's and sub for short. So how I would say this, I would say students sub 0, meaning position 0 or the very first position in the array. Now if I run this, looks like it's already running. I must have already clicked it.
You didn't save anything.
I didn't save it. Let me save it.
Well, there's not actually nothing to show.
Well, I don't have it in a function.
Oh,
When you don't put your JavaScript in a function, it loads when the page loads. Right? If you put it in a function, then you can call it on click or something like that. Otherwise, it's going to run right away. Yep.
So you said you can assign like true or false to it. So if you assign true and you call that up in an alert, will it just...
Okay, so let's put position 2 to true. Okay, now how would I alert that true? How would I?
By doing 1.
Yeah, you change its position to position 1.
So would that do just treat it as a string, or would it like say an and or whatever?
If I refresh the page, it just says true.
Could you also use it as a value in the thing?
Yeah, you could use it as a number.
Okay.
Yeah. So if I wanted this to be 33, and then I would change its position to be position 2. Load it up here.
how would you do that if you wanted it to pull it based on you wanted to pull information? Like, could you use an array by saying,
So the question was, could you allow the user to pick which student? You know, and so here's what you would do. You would have a input type of text. ID is text position. And you could say in a label, enter the position in the array. And then input type of button. On click, we'll call the new function called just ARR. Value is click me.
can you not name that function array?
So I would not name the function array because it's a keyword. Yes. Now we'll talk about that here in a minute because you'll see what it looks like. But I'm going to call this function ARR. Now I will create a variable to store the position equals document dot get element by ID text position dot value. So I've got a variable that will now store the position, and just to make sure it's an int, I'm going to parse int on that value, and then I'm going to type in position for the subscript. I'm going to put the variable in my subscript. So whatever they type in the text box will be my subscript. And I'm going to get this back to your names. So you see if I have any typos there. I did that kind of fast. Enter the position in the array. That's Alex. Position 1 is Nathan. 2 is Clint. 3 is Michael. Let's see what happens if we go to position 4. Is there a position 4?
No.
There's not a position 4. So that's a common mistake, right? That's an out of bounds. You have an out of bounds array. If you have 4 elements, if there's 4 pieces of data, their positions are 0 through 3. Okay, there is no position 4. There is no index 4. Let's just see if I put 4 in here. undefined. Okay, that's it's not defined. It's not there. It doesn't exist. That makes sense at that point. You could put in 1,000 and you're going to get undefined. There is no subscript 1,000 or 4. Yes.
Is there any way to pull information based on if you're ever going to put Alex in there and then have it pull up information?
Oh, okay. So the question is, what if they put in the username Alex? Okay, and the answer is yes. In which case, I'm going to say var name, right? And name is not an int. Enter the person's name, and I'm just going to do this. And we haven't talked about if statements at all, but we will in this chapter. If students sub 0 double equals Alex. Alert, hi Alex. Okay, now if the user, oh wait a minute, if student sub 0 double equals,
Wouldn't it be named?
it should be named, yep. Whatever comes from the text box. If student sub 0 double equals name, we're going to say hi Alex. And it's going to be case sensitive, so it works here. If I
type in Michelle, it's not going to say hi, Michelle.
if it's since it's case sensitive right now, the lowercase Alex doesn't work. And since I didn't type in any other if statements, that's the only way to test it. But to answer your question, that's how you do that. So, it's really interesting. You ask these questions, and it's good because this is showing how to use an array in a comparison. You're comparing position 0 to a variable that comes from a text box. So that's all good stuff there. Let's hop back into our PowerPoint. We did that. We talked about how we reference them by their indexes or their positions. What's nice in JavaScript is that arrays can dynamically grow in size. So right now, there's 4 elements in the array. But if I said students sub 4, which is technically the 5th element in that array, and I assign that to Dan, right? The array just grew in size. It went from 4 to 5. It just created another space for it. Yes?
So if you hit a 1 there, would it replace Nathan with Dan?
Yeah, if you put a 1, it would replace Nathan with Dan. Yes, it would. It would reassign whatever was there with new information, just like a variable would, right? But let's go ahead and demonstrate this. Student sub 4, and if I just do an alert of students sub 0, that'll print out Alex, and right after that, I'll do an alert of students sub 4, and you're going to see Alex and Dan print out. And we got to click it. There's Alex and there's Dan. So it grew in size. And that's not always the case. Okay, different languages handle that differently. That's called redimensioning array. Redimensioning says how many you're changing the number of elements in the array. So let's open up the PowerPoint here. We talked about the arrays being different data types. That's good. I'm gonna draw everyone's attention to this for a moment, because right now when we've been doing our output, we've been using a text box or an alert up until this point, but we haven't really updated, let's say, a heading like a h1 tag. Like, what if you wanted to change the h1 tag to say something? That's where you use inner HTML. Versus right now we used a value of a text box. So let's do that real quick. Let me I'm just going to have an H1 on my page. It says hello class. And then when we have a button, when you call the button, it's going to call my function. And then my function declares an array with 5 students. And I'm going to give my H1 an ID of heading. And I can do document.get element by ID heading, which is this heading right here, dot inner HTML. So the inner HTML property can change what the heading says. So it's going to say hello class, and we'll have it say, instead we'll have it read from the array students sub 2, which is who? Who's student sub 2? Clint, right? Remember, we start at 0. So Alex is 0, Nathan is 1, Clint is 2. Okay? So the whole idea is we've got an H1. You click on the H2, or excuse me, you click on the button. It changes the H1 to say Clint's name instead of hello class. If I did not have a typo, which it appears I did, student is not defined. Do you guys see my mistake? Where's my mistake? You need an S on the students. Good. That was a test. So now we're updating the HTML. If we go ahead and inspect this page, and we look at the H1, look, it didn't change the tag. It changed the inner HTML. It changed the content. The H1 is still there. The ID of heading is still there. It just changed what the H1 says. That's pretty cool stuff. And I don't think we have shown that up until this point. Yeah, let's do this. Document. You might say, well, we can change the content. Can we change the style?
Blue.
And I believe we put that in quotes. There it goes. So we can change style, we can change content. Oh my gosh, it's becoming dynamic. Yes.
So if you on click, you can change from like an H1 to an H2 as well.
Yeah. But not with inner HTML. Okay. That's coming up. There's a whole bunch of methods we're going to learn. Yep. Okay, so that's when they say inner HTML right there. That's what that does. That changes a tag of something. You know, that changes the content of something, I should say. Okay. Modifying elements, and we already briefly talked about this. Right now, Nathan is at position 1. Well, if Nathan decides tomorrow he's dropping out, we could say students sub 1. We can change it from Nathan to be Darlene. And now that position has been updated with a new name.
What name is that?
Did I misspell it?
Mm-hmm.
Help me out here. 1E.
E-N.
I apologize. All right. And just to prove it, there we go. It should, instead of print out Nathan, it should print out Darlene instead of Clint now. One of these days, I'm going to stop closing the browser and I'm just going to refresh it.
Take my place.
You think you're coming back?
Big shoes.
There we go. So you can update an array. It's just like a variable, right? Remember when we talked about variables? Variables are called variables because the data in them varies, right? At any point in time, the variable can hold a different piece of information. It's the same thing with an array. At any point in time in the script, it can hold a different piece of information. Now look at this. If I change this, if I put this statement right there, what's the heading going to say at this point?
It's gonna say Nathan,
It's still going to say Nathan,
unless you look at it twice.
right? Do you see? Let's see if I refresh. Do you see that? So at this point in the script, student sub 1 holds Nathan. It's not until this line executes. Let's see if I put it in both places. What do you think is going to happen here?
Will it go to Nathan first and then?
It'll change to Nathan first. You might not even see it. It'll probably be a flash. Then it changes to Darlene, and then it updates the heading again to say Darlene.
Is there any way to put a pause in that?
You didn't even see it. I didn't see it. You gotta be real quick to see that.
Didn't nobody see it?
Yes, there's ways. There's timers. There are timers where you can say pause for 10 seconds. Okay. I think we get into that in chapter 4. Believe it or not. Does that make sense? Good. We're gonna use this property right now. How many students are in my array?
5.
5. There are 5 students in my array. Their positions are 0 through 4. Okay. Well, there are elements in my array. And in here, I'm going to say students dot length. Okay, now what length is? Length is a property that returns the number of elements in the array. Okay, and we're going to use this length property when we start talking about loops. Okay, so this is an important thing to understand what the length of an array is. So at the end of all this, there's going to be an alert box that says there are, if it works, there are 5 students in my array. Wow, it's interesting that the alert pops up before it even changes. That's interesting. I wasn't expecting that, but that's how it functions. We don't really work with too many alerts anyways. In most websites you go on, unless it's a really annoying, spammy kind of a pop-up that you can't close, you're not going to get an alert. You know, most websites, people find alerts really annoying, right? So we learn how to do an alert for practice, but unless you're creating a really annoying pop-up, you're probably not going to be using alerts.
Don't go to the dark side.
Don't go to the dark side. Okay? Point is, the length is a property that tells the number of elements. Now, this is the easy way of creating arrays. You could call it even the shorthand. There's another way. Using the array object, and this is the syntax. So I'll create another array. So I have one array called students. I'll have another one called favorite baseball teams.
I thought you were going to say favorite students there.
Favorite baseball teams. Okay, equals new array. And in here, you could put the number of elements. Okay, and then you can say favorite baseball teams sub 0 equals St. Louis Cardinals. Favorite baseball team, and there's 5 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's go ahead and change their positions or their indexes. And my top 5 favorite teams are all the St. Louis Cardinals. That is a true statement.
I think
Today, for the recording, I have to say that the Chicago Cubs won the World Series last night. It's in the first time since 1908. And it ruined maybe my entire week, if not my entire month. I haven't determined that yet. But I am not a happy person. It ruined, yeah, it's that bad for me.
You should include the Angels on there.
Nope. These are my top 5. Okay, so what's easier? This, or this?
Huh?
Right? These are two ways of doing the same thing. What's an easier way of creating an array? Array, favorite baseball teams is a new array with the number of elements, and then putting it all in here, or just var students and then having your brackets, separating them by commas. Okay. Well, I'm not getting any feedback.
I'm a repetitive person.
Actually, look, I did it wrong. It's still var. It's not array over here. That's a typo on my part. That's up to preference. If whatever way you want to create an array is fine by me, I find this way easier. Okay.
The second one looked better.
That's up to you. If you like the second one, that's up to you. It says array literals are preferred, which is the first one.
Is there any good reason to use the second one?
I think this is just there so if you see someone else coding it, you recognize this as a valid way to create an array. Okay? There's no benefit to using one over the other than, readability and what you find easier. On our next slide, slide 12, this is another something new. This is another new method that allows you to target an element by its tag name. Now, I targeted an element by its ID. Well, its tag name, in this case, I'm going to delete this section here. Try and simplify this down. Well, its tag name, the tag name in this case is h1. So if I don't want to bloat my HTML, right? If I don't want to bloat my HTML by adding an ID, and I still want to target that h1, instead of doing this, I could say document dot get elements by tag name. Get elements by tag name. And then inside here is our tag, which is an h1, followed by an array index. Inside this index says, okay, which h1 are we targeting? We only have one h1 on our page. So what position do you think the first h1 is? It's going to be position 0. So this says target the first h1 in our document.
When it first appears on the.
Yeah, the first one that appears. So here, I'll call this I'll just put number 1, and I'll put a couple others, number 2, number 3. Okay? And again, the whole idea, document.get elements. Elements is plural, right? Pay attention to that, elements, meaning it's grabbing all the h1s and putting it into an array. You're specifically saying number 0 or the first one in your HTML document in the order that it was written. All right, let's see if this works. Number 1, number 2, number 3. I'm going to just take a quick glance at the console. No errors yet. Click me. I changed the first one to Darlene. How do you think I would change the third one? What position would this be? Position 2. If you paid attention to that, you might have learned something there. All right. And so we're going to go ahead and move on from a break here on this end and talk about repeating code. Looping. Where arrays are kind of those fundamental data structures. A loop is a fundamental control structure, right? And it's called a data structure holds data. A control structure modifies the execution of the program. It modifies the control or the execution of the program. And a loop does just that. It repeats your code. It makes your code run multiple times. And you might say, well, why do I want my code to run multiple times? It's to get your applications to run repetitive tasks easily without having to code a whole bunch. It's a simple statement that gets you to execute simple repetitive tasks many times. And there's a lot of simple statements that need to be repeatedly executed. Greg? Yeah, so an example might be earlier we were saying, well, what if we want to allow the user to put data into the array? So every time you click the button, you put a new name into the array. You might use a loop to do that because there might be 100 names you have to put in there. So instead of coding that all in, you can code one loop to continually put the names in the array until you're done.
But all names they have to be included in the array, right?
They all have to be, yeah, they still have to be in the array, but the loop can help you with that. It's a simple repetitive test. So let me maybe I can just so I can demonstrate it. So let's delete what we had about arrays. And when it comes to loops, there's 3 types of loops that we're going to learn. But they all loop, okay? They have different scenarios where you would use one loop over the other. But ultimately, they all repeat code. And their syntax is hard. And I'm going to tell you, in other books, in other programming books, one chapter deals with arrays. Another chapter deals with loops. And a third chapter deals with if and else statements, if else and conditionals. Whereas this JavaScript book packs it all into one. So to piggyback on what I said after the first chapter, I said keep the intensity up. Okay, where it was at, you got to do that again for this chapter because in a way you're packing 3 chapters of information all into this one chapter. It's a lot, okay? So we have a guest. So let's write a basic loop, and the first loop, and just to demonstrate it, is going to be our while loop. And a while loop looks like this, except for in the parens, you have to put a Boolean condition. What's Boolean? And what type of condition am I talking about?
It's 1 or 0.
Well, a condition would be like what we just had. Remember that conditional operator, or I called the ternary operator. It's a condition meaning is the age less than 21? It has to evaluate to true or false. It kind of looks like an if, right? Oops, I didn't mean to type that. Kind of looks like an if, but it just has the while in front of it. While age is less than 21, do something. Okay? But in here, okay, this is a condition, meaning you have to evaluate it. And it's Boolean because it's going to evaluate to true or false. It's not like 8 minus 2, that evaluates to 6. It has to evaluate to true or false. So while x is less than 10, I'll say var x equal to 1. While x is less than 10, alert x and increment x plus plus. What happens if you don't increment x? Huh? It'll never stop looping, right? Because if x was 1, so there's a couple important things going on here in this while loop. First off, you declare what's called a control variable. It's called the control variable because that's what's going inside of your loop. And it's going to control the number of times that your loop iterates. An iteration is one time through the loop. So the control variable, so you have to declare your control variable. Then you have to test your control variable to evaluate to true or false. Then you have to modify your control variable. If you don't modify your control variable, that's where you get hung up, and like Nathan said, the loop will never break out of itself. So let's just run this, and you'll watch the alerts. Once we click, the alert will go ahead and count on up, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and it stops at 9. Why did it stop at 9?
Because then it's over 10.
Yeah, 10 is not less than 10. So we'll never print out 10. Okay? So 3 important pieces to this that are worth remembering on a while loop. You have to have a control. You have to test the control. And you have to, and this line right here, modify the control. And instead of doing alert, let's do this. Let's say document dot, and what we just said, get elements by name. We got an h2 dot inner HTML. I'm going to say plus equals x. So the first, all it's going to do is it's going to take, oops, don't forget your subscript. It's going to target the second H2, this one right here, and it's going to print out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all in that heading.
I'm about to say, aren't they H1s? So should it be-
Those are H1s, jeez.
That's a 3.
That's why I got
That's why I confused, my apologies. I did that fast. Inner HTML of undefined. Get elements by tag name.
What's the difference in name?
Name is the name attribute. Tag name.
Oh, okay.
Okay. My mistake. My mistake times 3. Let's fix this. And let's relaunch it. Relaunch Chrome. Try again. Now it appended, right? It appended what was already there. So number 2 was already there. It appended a 1, then it appended a 2, a 3, a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. How might I use this with an array? I don't know if I would. Maybe we shouldn't. I'll do it real quick. I'll start off our control variable at 0. Now I'm going to use our control variable as a subscript. numbers sub x equals, and I can set them all equal to 1. But you can see here what's going to happen. What happens here, the first time through the loop, x is 0. Then this will read numbers sub 0 equals some number. So, Greg asked, what's the benefit of, real world example of where you would use a loop? Very frequently, you use loops to put data into arrays because it's an easy way, just by using the control variable as a subscript or some variable as a subscript that's incrementing, you could put data into it. Okay. I'm going to go on to the next example of a loop. A DoWhile. Now, a while loop is known as a pre-test loop. It's called a pre-test loop because you test the condition before the statements ever execute. Does that make sense? A pre-test loop. So here's your test. If this test is false, the body never runs. So for example, if x is already equal to 100, I fat fingered a hotkey and it closed my HTML. There it is. Okay, so let's take a look. We're still on our while loop. X is 100. Is 100 less than 10?
No.
So does this ever execute?
No.
Do you see why that's a pre-test loop?
Yes.
It tests the loop before the body ever executes. A do-while loop, make sure I'm still recording. Okay. A do-while loop is a post-test loop. Look where the test goes. So here's the body. Do the body while some condition is true. So here's the thing, the main difference between a while and a do while. If you don't know if the body of code or the block of code, if it needs to execute 0 or more times, then you use a while loop. If your statements need to execute 1 or more times, then you use a do while. So you just have to think about the scenario, because the scenarios are always going to be different. Whether your body, the loop body, needs to execute 0 or more times or 1 or more times. And so I can just delete this while. Okay, and we're now doing a do while loop. I'm going to delete these comments. Do while is a post-test loop, right? It tests a condition after the body executes. So let's do this. I'm just going to take our documents.get elements by tag name h1, the third one dot enter HTML equals, and I'm going to say x. I'll say plus equals x, so it appends it. While x is greater than 90, and then we decrement x. We're going to start x off at 100. We're going to start x off at 100, print 100 to the, append 100 to the screen, decrement it to 99. Is 99 greater than 100? True or false? True. We print 99 to the screen. Decrement it to 98. Is 98 greater than 90? True. Print 98 to the screen. Decrement it to 97. Is 97 greater than 90? All the way until 91. Print 91 to the screen. Decrement it to 90. Is 90 greater than 90? False. Break out of the do while. It's when this becomes false is when you break out of the loop. Okay? The loop starts at the curly brace, ends at that curly brace. Let's see if I have any mistakes. 100, 99, 98, 97, 96, 95, 94, 93, 92, 91. There's no 90. I'm just trying to get you guys used to how they work, how loops work. Seth?
Sorry, but what would you be able to do in a do while statement that you could not do in a while statement?
Nothing. The bodies can do the same things. It's just a matter of, do the bodies need to execute? Is there a potential that the bodies don't need to execute? If there's a potential the body doesn't execute, then it's a while, because it's a pretest loop. If you know the body has to execute one time, use a do while, because that's always going to execute at least once, which is what the do block does. Do this code while this is true. Okay, let me pause the lecture here. We have a guest. So we've covered a while, we've covered a do while. The last one is a for loop. Okay, so I'm gonna show you how a for loop works instead of a do while. And I'm gonna take my array back to nothing, and all we're gonna have is a for loop. And I'm gonna talk about the benefits of a for loop. Remember, in a while loop and in a do while loop, there were three parts I kept talking about. Right? I'm gonna review those three parts because I went over them quick. Okay? The three parts were this: declare a control variable, then you had to test something, then you had to modify the control variable. Okay? And that's what we just got done talking about, 2 loops ago. Did you notice in the while loop, the first loop, we declared the control variable, let's say on line number 5. Then we ran the test on line number maybe 15, and then we modified the control variable, let's say on line 20. So those were the 3 things that were happening kind of here and there in the code. It wasn't all in one spot. That's the benefit of the for loop. A for loop is just another loop. It's going to repeatedly execute code. But the benefit of a for loop is that all 3 of those things happen right here. The first thing that happens is we declare our control variable, which is x. The next thing is we test x against a condition, and it's going to evaluate to true or false. The last thing, modify x. Okay? And then in here, just like we did before, we can update our document, get elements by tag name, h1 sub0 dot enter HTML plus equals x. Okay, so all we're going to be doing is taking this heading and we're going to append 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 to it, just like we did with the other loops. And I went too fast. Oh, you know what I did? I went and did some Java here. We use var in JavaScript, not int. You guys probably were confused by that if you hadn't seen that before. So let's rerun this again. There you see, it starts off at 0 and it appends it to our heading. Then it prints 1 to our heading, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So let's look at what happens. The first time through the loop, we declare our variable is 0. Is 0 less than 10? True. So the loop body executes. Then, this for loop confused me when I was first learning for loops, because if we follow the flow, this happens first, then the test, then the body, then the increment. You see how that flowed? Okay, so then x increments from 0 to 1 is 1 less than 10. Yes, so it runs the body, then x increments to 2. Is 2 less than 10? All the way until x is 9, it increments to 10. Is 10 less than 10? No, so it breaks out of the loop. Okay? So that's looping 101. And I know it's a lot because we already covered arrays and we covered a lot in this video. It's been an hour on this recording already. Michael?
Why does the increment go last?
Why does the increment go last? Well, where else would you put it? I suppose you could. I think you're asking that question, and I think your mind was thinking like mine. When I first thought this, I thought step 1 would be this, step 2 would be this, step 3 would be this, right? Then this would be step 4. That's what I thought. And is that what you thought?
Yeah.
Okay. It's because of, if you think back to when we learned the while loop, this is the order of how things executed in our while loop. So the point is that this is just like a while loop, except for all 3 of these things happen in one location. And that's the benefit. Okay? Now there are scenarios where you would use the for loop and you wouldn't use a while loop, and use a while loop and you wouldn't use a for loop, but that's not in the 101. That's not in the intro video, which this is the intro video. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and stop the video here, and then we're going to talk about tomorrow.